All right, hello everyone. So for our discussion today, we are reviewing the IRIS model, the writing IEPs, review and practice. So today we will be discussing questions 3 and 4. So for question number 3, it reads, Bella is a 7th grader with a learning disability. Her IEP includes the following PLAF statement for reading. Bella reads at a 4th grade level at approximately 100 words per minute orally. Her oral reading rate includes many incorrect words. When asked comprehension questions about fictional texts, she is able to identify broad concepts such as main ideas, main characters, and events. However, she has difficulty identifying main idea and supporting details in the content area text, science, social studies, etc. She struggles with abstract concepts, inferences, deductions, and connecting what she has read to real world examples. So for our first question, this is not an example of a high quality PLAF statement. Identify the elements that are missing or incomplete. For those that are incomplete, discuss information that should be included. Would anyone like to share?
I thought that they were not complete because they were missing the strengths, the parents' concerns, the students' instructions and preferences, and then the students' impact on the general ed curriculum, or informing the goals or support services that may be needed for the student. That was my thought on that one, because it was very broad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know if you have experience with like writing the IEP and identifying the various parts, and I think this is like one of the parts that for me was a little confusing. Because I know initially like the student strengths, parent concerns, that goes under like that section 7 area of the IEP, and then the PLAF kind of belongs to that section 11. So I saw that information kind of repeating itself. So that's where I was like unsure as to whether that information gets repeated in that section 11 again.
No, I think, yeah, definitely like that section 7 you talk about is definitely, I think it's something that I'm still struggling with, just because you're like, wait, what do I include specifically? But then you don't want to under type information, but then you don't want to over like making it seem like it's like you're writing this curriculum for the student, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, I see where you're coming from, Diana, because I know, like, I was confused as to like where the heck this was, because a lot of the information that we do, like in that 7 where you're introducing the student, their academic strengths, their needs, like all this information is in there, except for the only thing that I know that we normally don't put in there is the goals or service. Well, not the goals, because we do put like possible services that they would need. But in reality, when you do look at an IEP, a lot of it does kind of repeat itself a lot, because a lot of the information that you're putting in there, you will see it in when it does the breakdown for each curriculum that they're doing. So like if it's for math, you'll see some of that portion going into that part. So I feel like there is a lot of repetitiveness, but they kind of differentiate with each other because you're adding more detail to each one.
Mhm.
And I feel like the statement is kind of like a summary of everything, you could say.
Mhm. Okay. Are we good to move on to the next part?
I think so.
I think so.
Okay. So for part B is based on the PLAF, the statement above, Bella's IEP team developed the following annual goal. When given a textbook passage at the 4.2 grade level, Bella will read the passage out loud at the rate of 100 words per minute by the end of the school year. So there's a couple of questions that go along with this. So does this goal contain all of the requirement elements? If not, identify any missing elements. Does the annual goal meet the SMART criteria? And is the annual goal sufficient to meet all of Bella's needs in reading?
I don't think it meets like the annual goal because I feel like there's some missing information. Like I feel like the trials, like I don't know how many times, and I think that you could also like talk about like at grade level, because there's really no like what level she's gonna be reading at.
Mhm. Right. So I think I agree with that. Like it considering a SMART goal, I don't think so. Right. There's elements that are missing from it. But I also see it doesn't really fit well with her grade level. She's a 7th grader and her goal is a 4th grade level tax. So right there, it's kind of like a red flag. Even though she's reading at that level, that doesn't mean we necessarily only limit her to that curriculum, like 4th grade curriculum. And that is specifically just for reading, because there are other elements that it states that she struggles with, such as like identifying more abstract themes like main idea, supporting detail. So possibly creating a goal around that as well, because I think that's also something important that she needs to be exposed to. Even though it's a 4th grade text, she can read, she can still develop those skills of theme and main idea.
Annual goal meets SMART criteria. I keep forgetting like the components of SMART.
So it's the specific, measurable, actively phrased, realistic, time limited. And I think, like you were saying, Diana, like it's not meeting it because it's so broad and it's not really meeting the needs that she has. So it's like it's talking about, her fluency is the only factor that's being worked at here. And then they're talking about she needs, she struggles with main ideas, supporting detail and content area text, abstract concepts, deductions and connections, and none of that is being met with a fluency goal.
Didn't think about that with the fluency.
Yeah, because that's the only thing. Like if you look at it, it's just talking about fluency, and then we're giving her a 4.2 grade level, and it's like it's not even meeting her reading level, and it has nothing to do with all the struggles that she has.
Right. So she's like, I think this goal gets at she will be able to read, but not understand what she's reading. So it's really not supporting her.
Figured how many components reading has into it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm trying to get the notes in here. So I'm putting like that, there is a measurable goal, but it's really not realistic because it just gives a fluency and it's by the end of the school year. Like I get like when you're looking at this, you're not breaking it down into quarters. You're looking at the overall, but like it's like back to that case with like what was it that I wrote it down about how like they're talking about Give me a second, because I wrote it down and now I don't know where I wrote it. It was that Latin word.
Oh, I feel like I know what you're talking about.
Oh, it's the merely more than de minimis, which is like you're giving the bare minimum to this, and
Mhm.
it's like not really giving a higher expectation for her.
Right. I think another part that is like just not included is it says by the end of the year, but it's not saying how often she will be assessed
So the
or
criterion, I will tell you, the way that they get around this is saying the criterion is where they're saying she'll get the 100 words per minute. That's the criterion. So it's like, okay, they're measuring it by that aspect, but if you look at it, that's what she was already doing. So she was reading already at a 4th grade level at approximately 100 words per minute. And there were incorrect words. One, it doesn't state like what the errors were, how many errors there were. So if there were more errors than there needed to be, then she technically isn't at 100 words per minute. And then when you're putting the goal, you're saying that's what she meant. Like, in a sense, she already met her goal then.
Yeah.
What she did.
Yeah, there's really like no way to like cohesive, like there's no really way to measure it like frequently instead of it being the whole big picture, you know?
I'm really curious at what her benchmarks would look like then, if this is her goal.
They're going to be so minimal.
Student will read 100 words per minute, 1 out of 2 trials, or I don't know.
And yeah, like because I was looking at it, I was like, oh, okay, it's the criterion when you're looking at the ARIS model. And it was like, words per minute, like I get, but that to me is still not measurable because you're just saying like she's going to do this, but you're not saying how often this is going to happen. But when you look at the model, that's sufficient enough, and it shouldn't be sufficient enough.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And then I think another like thing with at least with my mentor that she has kind of like mentioned to me like with students with a learning disability, timing them is if we're giving them time as an accommodation, why are we tying a timing goal like her words per minute? Why are we going to time her if we already one of her accommodations may be an extended time? So in that sense, it also kind of doesn't really make sense to have a goal in which she is timed.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like when it comes to like doing the IEP like in an elementary setting, it's so much more different than like in a high school because it's more detailed. I feel like, especially like as like for me, I'm writing IEP and like a lot of my information, like yeah, I did the pre-assessment with my student, but I'm also like have like every other teacher's input just to be like, okay, so like let me get the English teachers, let me get the quota. So I feel like when it comes to those like elementary middle, it's very like getting those fine details.
Yeah, I think like another thing to include in here would it be like what kind of words is she doing an error on? Are they decodable words or are they sight words? Is there like a specific pattern? Like is it words with diagraphs or vowels or like that information is also important to know. Maybe it's like letter sounds or like or where is she? It's the area of struggle in particular in reading.
Yeah, I feel like that was very broad. Like, obviously, if she's making those incorrect or those mistakes in her reading, it is important. And I think that you're saying that she's at a 4th grade level and she's reading approximately 100 words per minute, but it's good to know where this is falling, where she's not having that fluency. Is it, like you said, decoding, or is it what is it relations to? And then if you're not putting that and that's not a concern to you, then your goal shouldn't be the fluency portion of this. If you're saying like, oh, we noticed that these are her struggles, then that's where you should base your goal on.
Yeah.
So I guess we've answered that question. Is this annual goal sufficient to meet all of Bella's needs in reading? And it's definitely no.
Yeah.
I think I wonder, like, would Bella benefit from like a speech language pathologist as well, you know?
I think it's really like with this information that is provided, it's really, we don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it could be like letter sounds that she isn't really processing them, but we don't know because that isn't there. Like it'd be important to know if she can identify all her letter sounds, if she can identify diagraphs. Because I work with third grade, and that's something some of our students are still working, and that's like at a third grade. And if we're identifying as Bella at a fourth grade, it's just not too far off. So that could all, she's reading at a fourth grade level, but she's in seventh, so that could be a possibility.
That's interesting.
Right, Susanna, you're writing. Is it okay if we move on to the next question, or do you need another?
No, we're good.
Good? Okay. So, and then for the last portion of this question is, Bella's IEP team is ready to develop the statement of the individualized service and support services and support for her IEP. List and briefly describe the 6 elements that should be included in this statement.
I just had that open.
That's the complete individualized evaluation. We have to determine that she's evaluated and they have the right information to show that there is a need for services. We have the FAPE.
Not pay. How let's say it.
The, what is it? The free appropriate
Public education.
You had it on the top of your head. I had to write it down.
That will be
Go
like
ahead.
IEP, right?
Yep. Their individualized plan. Our LRE setting.
There we go. That's a tongue twister.
And that one we have to make sure that we're putting her in the least restrictive environment so that she's included with the her general education peers.
Yes. I think also like one thing I feel like, I don't know, I don't really see this in a high school setting, but like parent participation, maybe that's like a case manager thing, but I don't really get it from like.
But so parent participation doesn't necessarily mean that parents are involved in this process of getting the evaluation and everything, but there's a lot of behind the works where you're talking with parents, having that communication, making sure parents are aware of what's going on. It happens in every level. You just don't see it because I feel like as special ed teachers, we're just given like, here, you're doing the behind the works, but everything is happening. And we always have to make sure that parents are involved in some way, that they're informed of whatever the steps are happening, because it's like, if we were to reevaluate or if we were going to modify something, and like we can't just willy-nilly do it on our own, like we have to make sure parents are aware of what's going on and it's not thrown at them like, hey, by the way, this is happening. They should be aware of these things already.
Okay.
Yeah, like consent is a very big portion, especially with assessments. Like you can't assess a student, even though you may suspect there's a learning disability or something, you can't just go ahead and assess the student. Like you have to get the parent consent, and that is considered like the parental involvement because they're agreeing to this process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Mind blown.
It's a lot of behind the scenes, I feel like, and you don't see like the bigger picture that happens. And I feel like that's one of the, I would say, like, not a benefit of being one of the special ed teachers, because it's just like, oh, here you go. And you don't get to meet with the parents before. You don't get that opportunity like the general ed teacher does. Like, if you see that there is a concern, you have that talk with the parent and you're like, hey, like, what would you think about an evaluation? Like, you have that more on one-on-one as opposed to a special ed teacher.
I think it also depends on like the setting that you're in. Because in my case, like I'm in a co-teaching classroom. So I'm in there all day with both the students, the diverse learners, and the students and the gen ed population. And we had identified 2 students going through this initial process. And so because we are with them all day, we know the student rather well. We're there during dismissal, so we do have that opportunity to build that parent relationship with them. So in that sense, like the inclusion model is very beneficial for that sense, because as a special ed teacher, you really do get to know the student prior for them being serviced, because you are in a way servicing them before they actually have an IEP.
And that is truly amazing that you are in that setting, because I feel like the way special ed has been done in the 2 schools that I've been in, the 1 year it was nice because they had like a special ed for every grade level. So the special ed teacher was able to handle that grade level. And I feel like it was more personal. And now it's like, you have a teacher taking like us, we have a 6th, we have 7th and 8th, but then we also have a 2nd grade classroom. And it's like, you're only there for that one period and you don't get to meet students, parents, because you meet the students and you get to know the students, and you can sometimes identify that students are struggling, but you don't have access to notify parents. And I feel like if we went back to the model of one teacher per level, it would be more personal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's, advantages and disadvantages to each, model and setting, because, I mean, it's just really hard to just be everywhere at all times. But sometimes, that's what students need. They need that more small group, that pull-out area, and it's just harder for us to get data to interact with parents. But whereas when you're within the classroom, I think it's in a sense, like the workload feels a little bit greater, because it feels like you're juggling like the role of the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, I do want to let you guys know we have about 6.5 minutes.
Okay. All right. I think that's a good time to transition into question number 4. Number 4 is explain the importance of monitoring a student's progress towards meeting his or her IEP goal and reporting their progress to parents.
I think kind of like going back to like what you said at first was like having that consent for parents to know that the student's getting assessed. Because I know like I had a student that he was on the spectrum, like he was requested to do a evaluation, but then parents was like blocking it because they're like, oh well, my, like it was more like, oh my, I don't know, my comadre was like, oh, I shouldn't do this for my kid because then he's all like that funny. And it's like, dang, like the student now is like kind of, you see that struggle,
Right. Yeah, I think, and then like going back to like the progress monitoring component, that's like a really good tool to definitely present the data to the parent. Because we can definitely track the students also area of growth, given that they are serviced appropriately. We can definitely demonstrate that this program or their plan that they have is working for them, because we can see that growth in different time periods, especially when we're progress monitoring throughout and capturing data through from one point of a goal to another. We can see how the student has been performing.
And I also, it goes back to the whole thing of parents will know if some goals are not being met and if there needs to be some modification. It's not like, hey, we're going to set up a meeting because we need to modify this. And it's like, wait, but you haven't told me that there needs to be a modification, whether it be adding more services or reducing services. Like, it's coming out of left field. Like, it's beneficial because at least you have that documentation to prove, like, hey, there's a need for this. Like, we need to get this done. And if parents are aware of whatever is happening, it's not a shocker when a meeting needs to come up.
Right on the kiss.
Yeah.
It's also important when you're getting audited.
Definitely.
I want to be that teacher that has it wrong and then, you know, penalize.
Do you guys have any like preferred methods of progress monitoring your students?
I think for me, I just like based on the unit, I do like I had to have like what my summative at the end. So I like to have like mini assessments within like the different criteria and then making sure that like are they meeting this? If not, then like let me go back and scrap my lessons and figure out how I could make sure they're mastering that.
I think assessments is a good one. And then we also do like a collaborative log just to keep, and I think it's like the way they do it is like monthly, but it's at least it's done to know like, okay, we see that there's been growth here, or we've seen there's a struggle. We need to kind of work a little bit more on that, or we need to move on to the next thing. So that's what they do.
Yeah, we tend to track our data. Each student has like their own spreadsheet where we put like all of their data based on benchmark, and we tend to use the gen ed curriculum for their progress monitoring goals, but we are aware that not all goals can be met through the gen ed curriculum. So we do pull out and do progress monitoring groups like towards the end of the day to gather more data on a weekly basis.
Those spreadsheets be coming in clutch on Excel. Any things that you found like when trying to do like assessments that you're like, I don't get it, or I'm still confused when like assessing the student?
I think sometimes it's like we do the assessment, but we like, what does this mean? We have the results and it's like, how does this compare to like the rest of the students? Or it depends on like the type of assessment that we're doing. And then because our students do receive like modified versions of like our end of unit assessments, it's kind of tricky, like, well, yeah, they got an A, but it was like they received support in with it. So like, how do we like quantify that?
Yeah, no, totally feel that. What about you, Susie?
What was the question again? Sorry, I was
Like,
typing.
has there ever been like any times where you did an assessment, you're like, I don't get it, or I'm like confundido?
As a like myself as a student or as a teacher? I feel like, I mean, so what the thing is, like I have a lot of inclusion and I don't really have access to the assessments that are being given. And then I do modify some of them, and I have to like modify it a lot because I mean, like what the kids learn, like when we pull them out to like do their independent work, we have to modify it a lot already. So like we have to modify the assessment because we've already modified their work. And it's hard because it becomes a domino effect. And I feel like you are giving them the tools that they need, and you're like, okay, like here, I set you up, and then you give them the assessment that was given, and then you're like, oh, that just like didn't make any sense to them. And I was thinking that it made sense, but it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so then when you're like, okay, you don't want to modify it too much where it's too easy either. I feel like that's the struggle. Like, where is that medium?
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, the 30 minutes is up, y'all.
All right. You want to stop recording now?
Yeah. All right. And